Friends in Recovery, the Addiction Recovery Podcast, is brought to you by the Friends in Recovery community, a thriving network of individuals who are fighting back against the stigma of addiction. Join our hosts as they speak up about the real issues of addiction, treatment, and recovery. Friends in Recovery, the Addiction Recovery Podcast, is available on Facebook, Podbean, iTunes, and YouTube 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, here are your friends in recovery.
Hey, everybody. Back to the Friends in Recovery podcast with Jersey Ed, and I am Jersey Ed, your host. My two co-hosts, Tiffany, 12-Step Tif, and Noontime with Sky. We told you we're going to have a special guest this week. It is our one and only Noontime with Sky. How are you ladies doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. You look like you're doing wonderful too out in the water. It looks very peaceful and nice.
Yes.
I'm so excited to see Sky. That was a total surprise for me.
I'm full of surprises today.
My sister's here, my sister.
Exactly. And so today's show is about I guess good clinical look with Jeff Zeisel at Step 8, right, Jeff? How you doing? Good morning, Jeff.
Morning, Ed. Good to see you.
Hey, guys, I am not going to stay on here too long. I'm going to turn this show over to Jeff here in a second, but I do want to thank all the donors for making this show possible. Number one, everybody who donated. And I'd like to give an extra special thanks to everybody who donated to R.O.A.R on Recovery on a Raft, or our R.O.A.R trip, the second annual trip. Today, we are on our second day. We did 17 miles down to Delaware yesterday. We're raising money for the awareness of friends in recovery and addiction. And today we're going to be going 15 miles to our campground. It'll take us about 6 hours. And I just wanted to say hello to everybody. And you know, I don't like missing Jeff's shows, so I just wanted to say hello. But everybody's doing good. Everybody's okay. You guys, Jeff, I can hand the show over to you. It's going to be a good hand.
Thank you, Ed. Be safe. Enjoy.
All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. It's good seeing everybody again. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you, Sky, for coming on for our special guest, Tiff and Jeff. Bye, guys.
You have fun.
Bye.
So it was good to see Ed on the water, and this is the A team we have. So
Yes.
We've been doing Friends in Recovery for a while, and there's been a bit of a shift because now it's sort of independent, and as we like to call it, the Jersey Ed Show. Of course, my name's not Ed, and I'm not from New Jersey, so it's none of us. But we just saw Jersey Ed.
Ed, and I'm not from New Jersey.
That's right. And Sky, what about you?
My name's not Ed, but I'm definitely from New Jersey.
That's perfect. That was like low hanging fruit on that one.
Right.
Great. So we do this podcast. It's we all volunteer our time because we think it's an important thing, and you know, all of us have the same mission to sort of improve the lives of others and improve the lives of ourselves. And one of the things we know is that by participating in things like this, we all, you know, give something and we get something. So we've been doing this today. We're actually going to talk about Step 8, and I'm fortunate to have two lovely women with me who have a lot of insight and excellent recovery and wisdom. So we all share our ideas and thoughts, and it becomes remarkably synergistic. So we feed off each other, and we all walk away like, hey, that was a great show. And we've done this many times, and we always think like that was a great show. It can't be any better. Then we do the next one and it becomes better. So hopefully today's not the exception. I do know that there's an 800 number that is out there to support the program and the podcast. It'll probably be on the screen later. So we want to welcome all our Facebook friends who are watching, and people may watch it live and also pick it up later on the archives. The 800 number to support the program, and also to, if people have concerns or questions, they can call 800-989-6504. And there's also a email, help@friendsinrecovery.com. So that phone number is not for emergencies. It's for people who want to connect and so on and reach out. So today we're fortunate enough to be discussing a really great step, but it is interesting. So Ed had said to me, "Hey Jeff, do you mind like hosting, and you'll have Tiff and Sky with you, and we'll do it collectively." I said, "Yeah, that's fine." So I sent him a little text. I said, "Ed, who's a big Yankees fan," I said, Wally Pipp used to play first base for the Yankees. It was in the 20s, and he was one of the really premier first basemen, but he got injured. So it was this guy on the bench, a rookie no one heard of, who actually played baseball at Columbia University, which is my alma mater. And he was on the bench, and Wally Pipp gets hurt, and they ask him to play first and hit. He did. Wally Pipp never got his job back. He played 2,130 games in a row. That was a record of the most consistent baseball games, never missing a game, until the record was broken 56 years later by Cal Ripken, who played for the Baltimore Orioles, who I think played like 2,603 games, something like that. So I said, "Ed, you may end up being the Wally Pipp." So
podcast world.
Yeah, he may never get this job back again. So we're going to talk about step 8. How you guys doing, by the way, before we dive deep here? Everyone's good?
Well, my life is a little bit crazy. All I can say is I cannot wait for the kids to go back to school. Like, this cannot come soon enough in this house. It's just, I'm just ready for them to go back.
Yeah, they're probably ready too. When we were kids, like, you always loved the summer, and then you got bored. And at the end of August, like, I really looked forward to buying that 64 Crayola crayon box. That was like my highlight. And then school supplies was always like kind of fun. But we didn't always have money, so we had to like improvise. We couldn't get those. We would make our own covers for the books out of old brown shopping bags.
Brown bags. We did that too.
Yale University, the plastic thing for 15 cents. Oh, better not spend that. Guy, how are you?
I am doing pretty good. A lot of changes going on. I wanted to let everyone know, and it's a kind of good platform. I resigned from Genesis House, but I want all the alumni to know, like, and everybody know they can still reach out to my still the same cell phone number. But I'm moving on. I put in my 2 weeks yesterday, but that was actually my last day, so I'm gonna let the disease not attack my head on that one. But that's okay. But no, I'm excited. So I'm like super. I'm optimistic but nervous, and ready for a new chapter in life.
Wow, fantastic. Congrats.
Yeah.
It takes courage to move on, because people do the same old for their whole lives because they're afraid.
Yes.
And then, so really, and we operate with fear a lot. It's part of the human condition, but, but we also have the capacity of moving forward, having courage, and also being afraid. It's not one or the other. You learn to coexist with it. And that's life, really. Nothing is ever smooth, or many things are never smooth. Sometimes things are smooth, but that takes courage. So it's interesting.
Even good change, even
good for you.
Change can be hard.
And this podcast was, historically sponsored by Genesis House, which is a place we'll have, a admiration for. But things transition. Life goes on. We all move on.
Exactly.
And now it's independent, and this is an enterprise that Ed put together, and we're happy to be part of it.
Yeah.
So when we talk about step 8, maybe we can read it.
I was going to say, you want me to read it real quick?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Step 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all.
That's fantastic. So, Tiff, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's interesting. What it used to mean to me is very different than what it means to me today as I read it. When I first read it, I was like, in the beginning, I still was at that point where, nothing was my fault. I wasn't that bad. I looked at it totally different the first time I was introduced to the steps. But now, as I look at it today, and I have grown, both spiritually, physically, mentally, this was such a great practice for me to do with people that I have sponsored or helped. And I learned so much more since then, because I was able to really sit down, take ownership for the things that I had done. It wasn't just, my actions. It was all sorts of different ways. It could have been my depression affected people, my drinking affected people, my words, there were so many things that so many people I had harmed in so many different ways that I didn't think about how I had done that. All I thought were those very superficial things, yeah, I stole. Yeah, I lied. Yeah, I did this, right? But it was much deeper than that. And this really opened up my spirituality going through this process when I got to step 8. And I get to use it today. And I get to take ownership of the things that I do now, and in a way that I never, ever would have before, never would have done before.
Yeah, that's great. It's remarkably liberating because, once you own it, no one can sort of pin anything on you, and there's a lot of, we'll talk more about it, but, there's a lot of research around how apologies really make a dramatic difference in people's lives. And people don't have to accept your apology, but you're only responsible for your half of the equation. You got to take care of your side of the street. What they do with your apology or your admission, like, I did this and I'm sorry, you have no control over that. So, one of the things we learn in recovery and the 12 steps is that there's a limit, a very small limit of things we actually do have control over. So, but we do have control over our reactions and our behaviors at times. But we have to own all that. So that's great. Sky, what about you?
So when I first came in, same thing, like everything was about me, and everything I did didn't hurt anybody but me. And for me, like, I'm a few days away from 14 years, and that taking this long to kind of really see, like, a lot of life is about connection, and like, the connection is built, through my acknowledgement if I've wronged somebody, through owning it, through making it right, because I would want that done for me. Yeah. And I would want that done for me, but I didn't see that at first. I didn't understand, like, I get it, we rob money, but I didn't get robbing someone's peace of mind. My mom couldn't sleep for nights at a time because I robbed her peace of mind, and I didn't realize that for a long time because it was all about me, even after being clean. So it took a while, but I think with this one, just being willing to make the list, is a big battle, because a lot of us want to go to grave with the secrets. So some of us might have got some out in force, and then, we're going to look at it here, but it's another area we can start getting really honest. And it's a deeper level of honesty than we've gotten in 1. It's a deeper level of honesty we've gotten in 4.
Oh, yes.
Now, we're able, to look at like our part in things, and then again, talk about that connection, how we can improve the connection with other humans.
Yep. That's a great point. It's interesting because when we think about what we value, we really, most people value relationships. No one lies on their deathbed thinking, I'm so glad I got those boots on sale. It's about, I'm so glad I had these wonderful relationships and friendships and family. Exactly. And so I really like what he had said, is that you have robbed your mom of that peace of mind, and that's hard to get back, but it is fixable, because you can, as long as we don't sort of live in the past. So people who've been hurt by someone can sort of perseverate on that and never let it go. Chinese proverb, those who seek revenge shall dig 2 graves. So, sometimes you have to let things go, and it's not always easy, but, as I said earlier, we're only responsible for our part of the equation. So, you can apologize and the person can choose to accept it or not. And it is a process. It doesn't happen automatically. And by the way, if someone apologized to me, just because they apologize doesn't mean I'm not still upset and still not hurt and still, disappointed and offended. And I can still accept the apology and still have those feelings. It's a process. It evolves. It takes time. So it is pretty interesting. I did forget that Ed sent out a question of the week, which we will circle back towards the end on that. But it's, have we ever had a paranormal experience? So I actually have had 2, but we'll talk about them perhaps later. So, the clinical sort of interpretation of like things around step 8, it tells us that, because addiction and alcoholism, substance abuse are diseases, our brain gets hijacked and we do things that perhaps we normally want to do. So we have, deficits in character, and we lie, and we cheat, and we steal, and we are remarkably imperfect, as every human being is. But with that disorder, you go down that dark spot very quickly. And we do things that typically we probably have some shame about, and we hurt others intentionally or unintentionally. But if you hurt someone, and even if it's unintentional, it still hurt. It still hurts that person. If someone, chooses to like kill my dog intentionally, I'm remarkably hurt and remarkably angry. If it's unintentional, I'm still remarkably hurt and angry, probably. So it's not always the intention, but sometimes it's the outcome. But when we look at what Step 8 is about, it's really, and it's interesting because, you both have been in recovery for a long time, and congrats on 14 years. That's fantastic. So I think when you're married for 14 years, you get like, I don't know, a can of tuna fish or something. I don't know. What do you get in like recovery? Maybe a can of tuna
a coin,
fish.
A coin.
That's right.
Black and gold ticket.
Another day
Right.
above ground.
Embossed in a can of tuna fish on top. So after you eat the protein, you save the lid.
Oh, okay.
It's a new model that they're working on. But it is interesting that there's many roads to Rome, but when we follow the steps, there's generally a way that everyone is requested to do it, but people sort of venture off and do their own thing. So when you think about when you did your Step 8, what was that like for you? How did you go about doing it?
So I used the same format as I did in 4 with the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So from the time I was born, and then I added a spot to the day I did my A step, to the current date. And I wrote down where I went to school, in what years I was there, where I lived, places that I worked. And then on that timeline, I went through and was able to acknowledge some of my behaviors, the relationships, places or people or things I had done. It was a way for me to jog my memory and, get it going, being very thorough, rather than those things that I could think of off the top of my head that I had apologized for so many times.
Yep.
So I wanted to dig deep like I did in 4. I started with that graph of a timeline on a line graph, and used those milestones to really figure out what I was going through during that time of my life, because I had started drinking and using when I was 11. So it was easy for me to go back almost till, I was born. And, and that's where I started the list. And then as it went on, it wasn't just like things that I had done, tangible things. It was, the intangible things, the feelings that like the sleepless nights I had caused, things like that. I had to remember sort of those milestones. And that's how I did my A step. And I made a thorough list.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's interesting because there's something sort of psychologically oriented when you put pen to paper. We can have thoughts in our head, and it becomes a very cerebral experience. And then they come and go, because the average person probably has roughly between 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day. So you can have thoughts about things, and then all sorts of other thoughts come in, and you sort of lose your momentum and you forget what it is. But you write it down. It's permanent to you on that paper. Now, you could destroy the paper or get rid of it and so on, but it becomes a permanent thing. And then we become visual learners, many of us, where we see it written down and it's sort of it's reinforced. When kids are studying for exams and so on in school, one of the more effective ways to study is to actually read the material and then write it down. When you write it down, there's another layer of sort of imprinting it in your memory bank. And most people generally are visual learners, so, you read something,
it's also letting go of that imprint too.
Yes, exactly. That's right. So it's both. It's like the ability to put it down on paper. And that's the beginning of that step, identifying. And there's other things that, of course, that has to be done because you have to interact with this individual. But that's the first step. So the ability to write things down becomes very powerful. Like I know just in a general sense, like when I start my day, I usually write down things I need to do.
Mhm.
So, it keeps me organized and focused
And before bed, I do in my journal. And I'm planning for the day ahead also. It just alleviates a lot of those stressors and I'm able to let things go.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened in my ACE step. I had to get over the fact. I'm glad that someone was able to sit me down and because I can overcomplicate things and overthink. A lot of good alcoholics and drug addicts.
Not you, Tiff.
Yeah. And it was just, this list was for me. That didn't mean I was going out to every person on that list, right? It was a healing moment for me. I'll say probably 50% of that list went nowhere.
Yeah.
In the end.
Right.
But I had to get over that simple fact of, I'm not going to have to apologize to 2,550 people.
That's right. Good. Sky, what about you?
Institutions,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Not just people.
Yeah.
So, I did it really like similar, as far as like being able to like jog the memory and stuff, and write the list and all. Honestly, I put on Toby Keith, some like really depressing country music while I did it too. So I felt even more terrible,
Right.
which is why it wasn't a great idea, but I'm just being honest here.
You had to apologize to your dog and your pickup.
See, you get it. It honestly, like the first time I did it, I really had no idea what I was doing. Like the awareness, the accountability, I got that a little bit, but I didn't always see it. Like I said, with my mom, peace of mind, I didn't see that, I also didn't see the humanness of others until this step, you know what I mean? And sometimes going through an experience, I grew up in an abusive household and, I really was angry at my parents for a long time and blamed them for that. Right. And then, I saw how human they were when I was in the same situation and my son was that little person, you know what I mean? And I saw they were doing the best they could do, what I mean? And it just gave me a really like awareness and acceptance to what my childhood was, right? Like, okay, that's what it was. I'm here now. Let's change it. And I can move forward and start different,
Yeah. That's a great concept. It's interesting. So years ago before I had kids, I did some training for like the Child Welfare League of America. And we went around and we did training for social workers around the country on addiction and issues of like child abuse and, moms who were fit or unfit. And I used to say, oh my God, how can someone like abuse their child? What a horrific thing. Then I had kids. Then I completely got it. It's like, yeah, I know why you want to do this. Sometimes they can drive you nuts and you lose your patience and you're not perfect and you like lose your cool. So I remember like having to put myself in timeout. I was upset about something. I just sat in the closet and cooled off. And
full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It was full circle. And that's where we get to break the chains of family dysfunction.
Yeah.
That's where we get the opportunity to actually do different with our kids, you know, and get the help we need that our parents didn't get because their parents didn't get it,
Yeah, it's so true. And what great insight you have, like, gee, maybe they were doing the best they can, so it's interesting. So, I too grew up in an alcoholic home. I remember when I was in graduate school, we're talking about addiction, but really not very much. I mean, I took, tons of classes and I have, years of education. And I think I had one class that was actually an elective for like 1 credit on addiction. And I was like, but I always felt like, all right, this is how it is. But, now you can get masters in, addiction counseling and, doctorates and so on. So, it's a whole curriculum, which is fantastic. But it's interesting because I remember asking my dad when I was like finishing up grad school. So this is, over 40 years ago. I was sitting in my living room and I'm saying like, so do you feel bad about your addiction, your alcoholism, and how it impacted all of us in the family? Really what I was looking for was an apology. Of course I didn't get it.
Except what did I get? Apology you never get.
I never got it. So he probably did his steps, but not, I don't know. I don't think I got the 8th step. But I was okay with that because he was in recovery and that was fine. But I remember thinking like, I should get an apology. And I didn't, but he did say, well, I understand it's a disease and I forgive myself. Well, that has value. That has value. And it's not, I don't hold resentments, in that relationship. But, my father's long gone, but, It was I can't say I was treated terribly badly. It was just dysfunctional. So, but it is interesting. So, we think about these things and Tiff, I like what you had said, which is that you wrote stuff down that was for you. That's how, and we have to start with us because, what they say about AA or the step, it's a selfish program. You got to take care of you. As we often say, it's like being on the plane. The flight loses air pressure, the masks fall down with a small child. Whose mask do you put on first? Yours. Because if you can't take care of you, you can't take care of anyone else. So it is interesting how, you go through this process. And when I think about step 8 from like a clinical point of view, I think it's important that people get prepared that not everyone may be so forgiving. Not everyone's on board. People do hold resentments and there are things that they have trouble forgiving. I often hear about, someone murdered someone's son and they're living, they're in jail for life. And the parent, typically the mother, who's probably like devout, has spirituality, is willing to forgive that person. That's a remarkable individual. And, that person apologizes. Sometimes they develop these relationships, but, I think it's, quite challenging to be in that position. But the ability to like forgive and think about what hurt you might have brought someone is also very liberating for yourself because you can move on. And before the show had started, Sky, you and I were talking about like, oh, what do you think the clinical elements are here? And I said, part of it is, the ability to improve your self-esteem because you're getting rid of all this baggage, all these terrible things. And, we all have a dark side. As Mark Twain says, we're all like the moon. We all have a dark side that people don't see. Yep. But we think it's so horrific, that people would be aghast if we ever identified those things. Well, most people have their own stuff. So it's like, oh, your dark secret is like, no worse than the other person. And I thought mine was the worst, but I discovered it isn't, so we have to forgive ourselves. From a practical point of view, when you write things down to think about step 8, I think it's good to divide it into different categories. And I think one of you mentioned, sometimes you put these people down and you never even talk to them. Like you don't really, you want to make amends, but they're nowhere to be found. And what happens if reaching out to them causes more harm? Perhaps you don't. So I think the way that when I work with people, I say first identify all the people, write down everybody, but then write down the people divided into 4 categories. Category 1, the first group, people you can actually really talk to and make amends to, that you have harmed. And these are people and these are people may or may not be actively in your life currently, but these are people you can identify and reach out to. Category number 2, maybe a partial list. Maybe you haven't done terrible things and, but it bothers you. It is interesting. Sometimes people like say, oh, so-and-so must be mad at me. And you don't even realize, and they don't even know what you're talking about.
They're not even thinking about you.
Yeah. Like how many times have you done something like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And like, yeah. I need to apologize to you for what? For, the insult I made. I don't even remember what you said.
Yeah.
So we tend to
be rob yourself for your own peace of mind.
Yeah, exactly. And you're hanging on to this stuff and it's like so remarkably unhealthy. What do we say? Like it's taking space in your head and not paying rent. It's like there's no upside. Shit.
Yeah. Evict it.
We all do. You have to remind yourself, well, it's not so bad. So that's the second category. The third category may be people who you feel like you need to, make amends to, but they're really not so available to you. You just don't know where they are. But, you put them on the list. Like the kid who sat next to you in 7th grade and you did something, So an interesting story. When I was in college, I was like, when I finished college, I took off and traveled around the world for like 4 or 5 months. And I went with my brother and a friend, and we were in Athens, and we also they were going back to this graduate program started early. I had a little more time. So I said, I'm going to go to Istanbul. So I take a bus. It's like a 2-day bus ride. I meet this guy on the back of the bus. I think the bus is actually going to Tehran. And I meet this guy who I think is Turkish or Iranian. Turns out he's Puerto Rican from the Bronx, and we became great friends. We actually hung out together. We shared a hotel room together. When I got back, we hung out together in New York City. And when we were together, I remember thinking, like, there's a quality about being with certain people that you just connect very quickly. But he had told me a story when I met him that he served in Vietnam and he was a Marine. I said, great. And he was a Golden Gloves boxing champion. I said, even better, because I'm in Istanbul. I'm 22 years old. Not the safest place. Hey, I got a guy with me who knows how to take care of himself. So we lost touch. 40 years later, he reaches out and apologizes to me. He said, I was in the Marines and I was never in Vietnam. So I said, hey, apology accepted. I mean, he didn't offend me.
Right.
But it was something that he hung on to for like 4 decades, bothering him. And we stay in touch a bit, and I haven't seen him, but that was in 1977, a long time ago. So, but it is interesting. The ability to write some of these things down is important, and then you go through different categories. And I think the last category is someone's trying to call me and interfering with the podcast, which is life is imperfect. But pardon me. Okay. Here we go. All right. My apologies. So one of the interesting things is that the last category are people who you cannot actually reach out to because it'd be hurtful to them. Because you bring such pain to their existence that maybe you just avoid doing that, or it's just so unhealthy. And maybe you just live your life saying it's imperfect, like I do the best I can. When you made amends, did you find that people were readily available to accept your apologies?
Say that again, Jeff.
So Tiff, when you made amends to people, did you find that people were willing to say, I accept your apology for what you have done?
Okay, now I see. So it was interesting. Most people, yes, were it wasn't so much that they were willing to accept my apology. They were thankful that I acknowledged my behavior and that I was not there to defend myself. I was genuinely, asking also if there's anything else I needed to know. And so they had the ability to share with me the things that I didn't know that I did, or I didn't remember. And so there was more of a mutual understanding. It was like growing together as a relationship more than, and I'm sorry versus, whatever, but they were really willing, seeing how hard I was trying. They were just as willing to accept my apology and offer forgiveness. A lot of forgiveness came my way. Lots that I didn't anticipate.
Yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes you think what you've done is so terrible and they don't think it's that bad. Other times you think what you've done is not so bad and they think it's terrible. So, I wanted to add a little element to the story. So that my friend who I met in Istanbul, we stayed in touch. He tells me a story which was like unbelievable. So do you remember the shooting in New York in 1976, the Son of Sam shootings, David Berkowitz?
Yes.
Turns out David Berkowitz was from the Bronx. So was my friend. And they were in the same homeroom class. And my friend used to give him a hard time, sort of bully him a little, which is, not a good thing to do. So I would say, maybe you were the reason why he did these things. I sort of said in tongue in cheek because David Berkowitz, murdered a whole bunch of people and did terrible things. But I always wondered, did he feel bad about he wasn't a evolved, he lived in the projects. He was bullied himself. He picks on Berkowitz, Son of Sam. Sometimes you just don't know your impact on others. I mean, David Berkowitz was psychotic. So, someone having a bad experience in ninth grade or 10th grade is not going to make you become a serial killer. But, sometimes you feel like responsible. I'm not so sure he did. I don't think he said like, oh, it's my fault. But, we sometimes blame ourselves a lot. Tip, what about you? When you made amends to people, were people gracious in accepting that, or did they push back?
I had the same experience as Tip, like where everybody pretty much were accepting, forgiving, and proud that I had the acknowledgement that I was doing this path of life. Honestly, I think the hardest person was just myself. You know what I mean? Because just like I was the last one to know I was an addict, I was the last one to know I was doing a good job. So these people saw it in me. I didn't. I did not see it in me. I was so blind to it. I still thought I was, a junkie on the street, even though I'm paying my bills, going to work and having a sponsor work. And I'm doing all these awesome things to get better. And everyone else is seeing to accept me. So that was a big part of 8 and 9 for me, at least. It was really accepting and I'm forgiving myself,
Yeah.
That's probably the hardest person.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I had that was very surprising to me too, because I was very hard on myself and self-critical, which you guys know that I am, but it was still you still have that little, bit of guilt and shame. And of course, what you're doing doesn't make you feel like you're a very good human. But so many people recognized me for what I was doing. They made me feel better. They made me feel like, doctors, lawyers, professionals, all these, lots of people suffer from addiction. They made me feel not alone. Some of them did. It was very enlightening. Very enlightening.
Yeah, we walk in the door kind of already stigmatized. We know the stigma and then we feel it. So it's forgive ourselves. We're an addict. We're carrying all this baggage. Poor us. I'm an addict.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of AA meetings where, in any sort of group support, you're not alone in this. We share our pain. I take a little of your pain, you take a little of my pain. We hear each other's stories, and all of a sudden and we also see how people get well. So it's not only oh my God, misery loves company, which is actually, I think, accurate in many ways, but it's also, I see how people get well and recover, and they were, quote, worse than I was, and they're doing fantastic. So if that person can do it, I can do it. And, we don't judge people. We try not to take their inventory, but, we sometimes look at people and we relate to them about other experiences. So I think that's, remarkably powerful. The research around apologizing is pretty significant. So there was a hospital in Michigan where there was medical malpractice, and the doctor was going to be sued because he had done the wrong procedure or something went wrong. And he had a relationship with the family. And he said to the HR and the legal counsel of the hospital is that I really want to talk to the family and apologize. And they said, no, we don't want you talking to them because we're going to be sued and this will work against us. So, he had his own consciousness about this. And he said, I'm going to violate the policy of the hospital because I have to live with myself. I want to be accountable and take ownership and apologize for what I believe I've done wrong. And just because the hospital says, don't apologize because it's going to lead to a lawsuit, that wasn't okay for him. He had to live with it, had to live in his own skin. So against the hospital policy, he called the family and took full responsibility and apologize. So what do you think happens? They choose not to sue. Why? Because the person apologized. And they actually said, we were waiting for the apology. And we actually hired an attorney. And we couldn't understand why you wouldn't apologize because we really liked you and we had a good relationship. And we know that you're capable of sorting out these issues. And you had awareness that what you had done was incorrect. And all we wanted was the apology. We don't want money. We want the apology. And he did apologize. Most hospitals now have changed that rule. That particular hospital in Michigan said, we will no longer prevent doctors or healthcare providers from apologizing if they've done something wrong. At the end of the day, if you're going to get sued, you're going to get sued. But the apology will sometimes be all they want. That's
priceless.
Yeah, that's the capital that we like. Like this guy you had said earlier, it wasn't money that was taken away from people. It was you robbed your mother in this case of time where she would not feel relaxed. Those things have such, significant meaning. So we also know that when we own our own behavior, it's remarkably liberating. You can sort of let it go. Like Tip, you had said at night, sometimes you write stuff down that may be troubling you that day, or just things you want to write about. It actually frees your mind to go to sleep. Sometimes I'll see people have like poor sleep and, they're preoccupied. I'll say, get up, put all the thoughts on paper, then go lie down. It does work, it works for me. Fortunately, I'm usually a pretty good sleeper, but, sometimes, things are in your head. So it is interesting how, the steps all add up to this. And step 4 is different than 8 because 8 really requires courage, to go to someone knowing you've done them wrong and not really anticipating how they're going to react. That takes courage.
But the ones that harmed you in return, like there's two-way street harm, they're really hard to do sometimes too, because I had to make amends to people that hurt me back. And it was like, I don't want to apologize. Then they apologized to me.
Right.
Like it was that mentality. So it was almost like, it made me angry just thinking about it, making amends with them. You know what I mean? So sometimes I just put them people on the list and it took time to get there, but they were hard because sometimes, like you said, like people harm us too.
Yeah.
And that's hard because you're not there to like get defensive or defend your actions, right? You're there to take ownership, accept what they have to say, that you didn't remember. And it can go either way. It can go good or bad. And you're, again, some of these people are people that really like had done me wrong. Like there was serious damage, you know what I mean? And it's like, it was sometimes difficult, but I just had to keep understanding that this was an activity for me. Right. To get rid of that guilt and shame. It doesn't, just because I'm apologizing doesn't mean I'm accepting the behaviors that they had done.
Right. And also you don't want to set yourself up to anticipate that they will apologize to you.
No.
I was hoping my dad would say something, but he didn't.
Yeah.
I moved on, probably because I
did that with my dad. I was like, I really thought like, he was going to take some ownership in his part of our relationship. And there it was, just like it says in the big book, I had these false expectations. And anytime I set expectations, I am disappointed. Yeah. And I just have to accept where my 2 feet are today. And that's all that I am in control of. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, that's a great approach. And, in the past, I've talked about Stoicism. So, Marcus Aurelius, the most famous Stoic Roman emperor 2,000 years ago. What would he say? He would say, there's so many things in life we have no control of. The only thing we can control is our reactions to those things in which we have no control over. So, you have no control over someone apologizing to you or taking their half. That's just how it is. And you can get really worked up. But that's how you have a delineation. Like that's them and this is me. And what am I working on? I'm working on me. I'm not working on them. Would it be ideal if they apologize? Most likely, but that's not step 8. This is about self-care, taking care of you. It's a selfish program. But part of that is like owning your behavior and being accountable. In the past, I've talked about David Goggins, famous Navy SEAL. He has a thing called the accountability mirror. And he takes little yellow stickums and puts it on the mirror and just reminds him of all his failings, not to make himself feel bad, but to make himself have insight, and all the things he's done. Like you need to stop eating poorly. You don't be late for those meetings, don't, be, drive carelessly and so on. And just making one accountable for those things. And he probably calls himself all sorts of bad names too, but sometimes it motivates us to move forward. The great thing about step 8 is that it's healing because you're going to allow yourself to feel good about yourself. That's, at the end of the day, you really want to look at yourself and say, I'm not so terrible. In fact, ideally, you want to look at yourself and say, hey, I'm an okay person. And, with that process, it allows you to move forward. Any other thoughts or comments?
No, I mean, this is this is one to not get overwhelmed by.
Mhm.
Realize that it's for yourself and no one else at this point. This is not the step where we're going out and making apologies or amends or anything like that. We're just recognizing our part in the whole shit show of a life that we had. And, it's putting us in a position to become a better human and turn that
No.
into an asset. And if I could say anything, just, don't be afraid and don't overcomplicate.
Yeah.
Just be thorough and willing.
Yep. Make a list, be willing. That's your only concerns here.
Make a start, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think this step has a real spiritual component. It's about believing, forgiveness, honesty, courage, willingness, accountability, having compassion, humility, putting yourself in another person's position. So, there's a powerful spiritual element to that. So we're going to wrap up, but the question of the week was, have you ever had a paranormal experience? So Tiff, what about you?
Oh my gosh. Of course you go with me first. So, what does he mean by paranormal?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. You tell me.
So paranormal is something that's sort of like, some people say, "Oh, have you ever seen a ghost?" That'd be paranormal. But I think paranormal actually extends beyond much. It's so much more complex than that. And because that's sort of like,
I think so too. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page.
Yeah.
Because there are things that have happened, that raise the hair on the back of your neck and all sorts of different things. But actually, I had a very crazy experience with Ed.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at New Way Treatment Center in St. Paul, one of their locations. And it's in one of the old Pillsbury buildings. It's a very historic, in a historic neighborhood, and it's a historic landmark. And we were sitting there's 3 rooms, 3 big, large parlors. And we were sitting in the parlor in the middle. The parlor on one side was the men's smoking. The parlor on the other side used to be for the ladies to have their tea. So that's what those originally were for. The men's smoking parlor. And then in the middle, the men and women could be together. Well, we literally were sitting there talking to the woman at New Way, and we could see like smoke, like someone had exhaled smoke and it was hanging in the air. It was, literally in the air. And we went in there, all 3 of us, to see if someone was in there that had vaped or smoked or something. Nobody had vaped. Nobody had smoked. And then Ed freaked out, and I didn't think of it at the time because I walked through the smoke. I walked through the haze, and then it just like disappeared, and everybody freaked out. And I was like, "What?" And they're like, "It's," and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, yeah, because I walked through it. I'm like, "Well, is it real?" And
that's insane. That's pretty wild. And things like that you do hear about, and who's to say these, there isn't some energy out there that these things happen. Sky, what about you?
So I've never had I've had little moments for sure. And I had like a psychic party at my house when I first moved in here. And I had seen certain stuff, and she actually told me, she said, your house is a portal. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, the ghosts come in and out of here. So ever since, I just don't think about it because I live in one, if I really, really do live in one, I don't want to think about it. You know what I mean? But, I live like all the historic towns. I've seen different stuff go down there, it
is pretty interesting.
A lot of it happens.
There's a lot of data out there, and I have a lot of, I've read a lot of things about these events that have occurred. I'm sort of a skeptic, but some of these things just seem like so crazy. Yeah. So I've had a couple experiences, but the one that I think is most significant, it's not about like another presence there. It's more of like remarkable coincidence. So I'm an identical twin. In 1974, my twin brother was going to school overseas in England, University of Leeds. And back then, you didn't have cell phones or anything. So we'd write each other. So I ran this letter. I'm actually a couple of days prior, I'm in like a library in Queens. I'm doing some work for college. And I walk by, I see this book, I pick it up. Survive the Savage Sea, about a Scottish family that sells their farm. They buy a sailboat. They sail around the world. A whale sort of attacks their vessel, and they're adrift for 10 weeks in the open sea, and they survive. One of these like interesting stories. I like those stories. So I read my brother, and I picked up the book, and it was so interesting to me. I just read it all night, and I went to bed at 3:00 in the morning. I finished the book. So I wrote my brother, "Oh, you got to read this book. It's a great book." 4 or 5 days, 6 days pass. I get an aerogram from England in the mail. I open it up. What does my brother say? "You won't believe I just read this great book.
Really?
Survive the Savage Sea." He read the same book on the same day.
Isn't that crazy?
Like, what are the odds? Like, so I looked up the print, how many publications were in print. It was printed in London with 500,000 copies. It was subsequently made into a TV movie. Not very good, but I remember watching the movie. Oh, that's the movie. Of course, the book was much better. So, is that like a paranormal thing? I don't know what it is, but it's pretty remarkable.
We went on when we were in Charleston last, Chris and I, actually we saw Ed and Stacy there too. We went on the haunted ghost tour.
Yep. At night.
It's a walking tour at night. And
that
was very interesting. And it's hard not to, you have to have the right tour guide, but this guy was very knowledgeable and certified in history. And I think he even was he was some sort of historian, but he had great information, and it's hard not to believe it.
Yeah.
A lot of people died there. There was pirates and fighting and wars and, all sorts of things.
That's right. Actually, I went on the same tour, and I remember the last spot we ended up I think it was a prison of some sort.
Yes, the jail.
And they said if you look, you can see things. We didn't see anything, but it was interesting because there's energy. Sometimes you feel it. So and there are a lot of stories. You see stuff on
energy,
that you read about.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it was a great show. Good to see everyone, and thank you, Facebook folks, for listening in and watching us. So be well, stay sober, and have a lovely day.
This concludes this episode of Friends in Recovery, the Addiction Recovery Podcast. Follow us on Facebook for past shows and updates, and enjoy free access to twice daily support meetings. Friends in Recovery, the Addiction Recovery Podcast, is available on Facebook, Podbean, iTunes, and YouTube 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.